what gets interesting then, and to come back to your question, is what are the other things that trigger people? And my favorite model for this is there's an author out there called David Rock, and he came up with something called the SCARF model, SCARF. Okay, so it's nice because it fits on one hand, so you got 5 fingers. You can just talk about the SCARF model. The S is for status. Status is the feeling I have that I have self-respect, that I am respected, that people listen to me, or that I am being listened to, and that so a status threat would be being ridiculed, being ignored, being talked down to, being made a fool of, and especially in front of my peers. Okay, so being made a fool of in a group of people who I wish or hope would respect me, that's one of the most catastrophic triggers that a human being can suffer. Okay, so that's the S. I'll go through the others really quickly. C is for certainty.
Ooh,
we like things to stay the same. We don't like change. The A is for autonomy. Don't box me into a corner. Give me options. We like it when we have options. I always like to say that some of the most dangerous people you'll ever meet don't feel like they have any other option except to use violence.
right.
Okay, so that's the A, autonomy. R is for relatedness. And I'm looking at that spider on the window behind you, Jonathan. Like, spiders and insects are about as far away from being the same as human beings as you can get. And so therefore, most people don't really care if they swat a fly or they squash a cockroach underfoot. But if you ask the same person to squash a cute puppy, which cute puppies have big eyes and they kind of fall around and they're cute. What I mean by that is they're kind of, we anthropomorphize them. They're more like humans. So
There's
the
also
vast majority of people couldn't do that. So that's a friend or foe scale that goes all the way down to fish and insects, and most people don't really, except for your vegans. Most people in general, I could say, are characterized by that kind of scale.
Okay.
So your family's really important to you, your neighbors are important to you, your friends are important to you, and then that scale extends all the way along to things that you wouldn't think twice to hurt. So that's relatedness. And that's why, you're a teacher, right? So when you go into a classroom, first day of term, you spend a bit of time just getting a feel for what do I have in common with these guys? Football, surfing, swimming, whatever it might be. So finding things in common is really important. That's autonomy. Sorry, that's relatedness. And the last component in the SCARF model is the F for fairness. So we respond on a gut level to being in a situation where we're not being treated fairly. Now that's everything from, again, to give you an occupational example, is like maybe you and your colleague do the same job, but he gets paid more. And that just triggers a really gut response from every human being on the planet. So that's the second tier. So the SCARF model kind of gives us a really, really, really good model for what triggers human beings: status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And in my experience, and I've been using that model for more than 10 years, no matter what I'm looking at, in terms of a video of an interaction, or I might be watching a staff member doing some customer service. If I see somebody get upset, I can generally call it off on one of those fingers, one of those domains, or maybe 2 of them or 3 of them, or if it's going really badly wrong, all 5 of them will be triggered, will be set off. So they're all primal. So coming back to your question, whether it's the top tier, can it hurt me or can I get benefit from it? Those 2 things are triggering. But then the SCARF model is a really good second tier, and it helps me to diagnose conflict problems.
Right, and those are things that I think martial arts are not, karate or not. Everyone can kind of understand, and taken from that kind of stepped back analytical view, how actually it's easier to probably interact with people if we had a better understanding of how human triggers actually work.
Definitely, yep.
But from a karate perspective, I feel like we almost don't really factor those things in at all when it comes to any sort of training. We don't really look at kind of, some people do, some people don't, but majority of the time, really don't. Now we build on this topic a little more, but
No, I'm happy to take it from there, because I think one of the things I like to think about when I think about karate training and other types of Budo is that, and something you said just a moment ago, is like having an awareness of other people's triggers is really key. So when you're in a traditional dojo, let's say, you are taught to be very aware of what's going on. So if a senior comes into the room, everything stops, everybody turns and bows. When you're asked, when you're in some,
Yeah.
I'm way more relaxed than that, as you probably know. But
Right.
I also see the value in this kind of hyper aware training environment. You know, when we line up, you know, we're always taught to be aware of who's standing behind and how far away, who's standing to your right and left and how far away, and the lines have to be neat. And I'm, you know, my own nature is not that square, so I kind of look at it and I go, why are we doing it this way? There's the etiquette of the bowing. There's the deference paid to senior members. There's the senpai kohai relationships. There's lots of things there that make you, if you're there long enough, you become aware of the relationships between the human beings. For, you know, whether it's a toxic environment or quite a benign one,
Right.
is a different story. And I guess you guys have talked a lot about that on this podcast. But anyway, maybe it's a topic.
How much we've actually avoided that topic.
But my point is, I think the martial arts training, while not addressing managing conflict, the non-verbal elements and the verbal elements of conflict anyway, rather than the physical elements of conflict or the physical collisions, there's elements of what we do in a traditional dojo which are helpful, I think, for developing people's awareness of other people's triggers. No, and I could talk then about our own triggers. So how we work on our own triggers, because of course the scarf model, as I just described, applies to, let's say, the other person we're interacting with in a given situation, but it also describes how we might be triggered ourselves.
Right. I mean, does this feel? I hate to just go back. Well, what about this feeling? But like, this definitely gets me into that mindset of every time you're faced with, you know, that kind of aggression, someone getting in your face, someone calling you out, someone challenging you, someone boxing you in. Like, there's that immediate cool heat feeling that goes through people. That like that adrenaline spike just automatically kicks in.
Yep.
And it's hard to describe, but I think maybe I'm crazy, but you know, some have led me to believe so. I think everyone has experienced that in some way, just that weird adrenaline trigger that you actually really can't control that coming out necessarily.
Or can you?
So I mean, that's something I wanted to get into as well, because there's, you know, kind of rational reasons for for that to happen, but there's also irrational reasons. Like,
I mean,
status is called out or your authority is supposedly blocked in. When you can't separate that, but your body will trigger that.
So I think this is where I was sort of thinking about this, and I think as a normal person, we're all normal people. As a person just wandering around in society, the amount of things that could happen that could trigger you like that are many, right, and varied. But let's say as a nurse, a security guard, police officer, or a retail sale shop worker, you can predict reasonably well, actually, what those encounters are going to be. And for that reason, you can predict what kind of encounters you're going to have. And then you can actually, over time and with experience, you can figure out what the things people are going to say to you are that trigger you. So for the, and I don't want to be too flippant about this, but for the police officer, one of the things people say to a police officer is, hey, I pay your wages. You know, I pay my taxes. You work for me. Right. So that's a fairly predictable, that probably top, it's, I don't know about different parts of the world, but it's probably top 10 in the UK. It could be top 5 things that people could say to you that would trigger you off, that would, you know, give you an adrenaline dump, make you feel like, you know, hurting the other person. And so for that reason, what we always say to people in this part of the program is we sit down for a while and we say, what are the things that, what are your triggers? What are the things that really set you off? And if you name it and you identify it, you put a name on it. That's the I pay your wages guy. and you prepare yourself beforehand, then when you meet that person in the street, it has way less effect on you because you've identified it. You understand the effect it has on you, and that cognition that you've done on the problem beforehand helps you respond at much less primal a level.